Okay, so the world of counseling,
Okay.
the whole thing.
All right.
What's wrong with it?
What's wrong with the whole world of counseling?
Not the whole world, but what's going on that's bad?
Okay. So, all right. In counseling as a whole, I think that one of the things that has been most damaging in the world of counseling over the last, I'll say 20 plus years is the victimhood of the client. And so what I mean by that is
isn't everyone coming to counseling some kind of victim of something?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
And even if they are, and even if it's like legit, right? They've been abused. Obviously they were a victim of abuse. No one's minimalizing that. But the allowing an individual to remain as a victim, excusing behaviors because of them being a victim, and encouraging them in their victimhood, to me is not helpful. So in other words, yes, individuals may have actions and behaviors that derive out of being a victim, but we need to be able to look at those things and go, are those behaviors and those actions actually healthy for them and others? And so I think that that's been one of the things that when you allow someone to remain a victim, so let's say trauma happened, when let's say they were sexually abused as a teenager, and if 10 years, 20 years later, you're still allowing them to remain a victim of that experience, we'd all validate the fact that they were a victim. But what I'm saying is we cannot continue to validate victim behaviors and allow their whole identity to be wrapped up as in the context of they were a victim of this moment. Okay. Because then that's actually not helping them develop into the whole person that they were created to be. No one's identity should ever be limited to just an experience or a trauma. No matter how bad it was, that shouldn't become their whole identity.
So yeah. What? Like how do they do this? What do you mean?
So sure. So let's say you go in to see a counselor, and it comes to light that you were, sexually abused, right?
Okay.
Therefore, that has led to a pattern, like let's say self-destructive patterns, okay, of cutting. Let's use that as an example, okay?
Okay.
So you started cutting yourself. You're full of anxiety. You're moving toward depression. So I think that one of the worst things we can do is coddle an individual and allow them to stay in behaviors that are actually hurting themselves, like cutting, and stay in places of anxiety and depression. And what I'm saying is, I think that if you simply continue you're a victim, poor thing, you're a victim, let's give you medicine to stop the anxiety, to stop the depression, or to at least lessen it. But you're still a victim. This is, it's perfectly normal to feel this way. And it is normal to feel a certain way coming out of trauma. What I'm saying is, but I don't want them to remain that way. And nor do I want that moment to be the very moment that defines the rest of their life and defines their identity.
How is a counselor doing that though? Like, how do you keep
because counselors will literally continue to.
I don't understand.
They'll continue to excuse the behaviors that are harmful to them or others
as
they're victims, because they're victims. In other words, they're acting out, well, you're a victim. Meaning that this happened to you, so you have a right to act out this way.
Forever.
Or this happened to you, so you have a right to feel this way forever. What I'm saying is you have a right to feel this way, but don't feel that way forever. You have a right, in other words, it was understandable that you acted out a certain way, but let's don't act out in that certain way forever. And most counselors, to be clear, when it comes to things like cutting, most counselors are going to do their best to help that individual get to the place where they're not cutting anymore, right? No one is going to be okay with an individual committing self-harm. All right. So I don't want to come across that way. But what I'm saying is,
so what's a better example?
Let's say you were abandoned as a child. Okay. Let's say you were abandoned.
No, I mean, what's a better example
than cutting?
Yeah, than cutting.
Like,
is there stuff that a
okay.
counselor would say, hey, that's good, keep doing that, or do that more, that you wouldn't say, hey, keep doing that, do that more?
Yeah. So, for example, if someone is using the same, I think if you're acting out in things that are, like if you're acting out sexually, let's put it that way. Okay. So you've become very sexually promiscuous, and I think that can end up being a danger to yourself.
And you're saying some counselors would say that's good, keep doing that.
Correct.
Because it's making you forget about your trauma.
Correct. Yeah, it's how what I would label that as is an unhealthy coping mechanism.
Oh, okay.
Where other counselors may say that's a healthy coping mechanism.
Okay.
And I would say that would be unhealthy. And so I think that probably is a lot of it is what is seen as healthy versus unhealthy coping, right?
Okay.
I would look at something like porn, that's unhealthy coping. Okay. Another counselor may go, no, that's completely fine. That's just a coping technique you've developed, right? When we realize that most coping, whether that is in almost any form of coping, is we are trying to get, dopamine, release in our body. That's ultimately what we're after. And so whatever causes that, okay, then we can go, well, that's coping. Well, not all coping mechanisms are the same, right? Some of them are very healthy, and some of them can be, again, what I would label as unhealthy.
Okay.
So, and even destructive, right? Whether it's alcohol or drugs or sex addiction, those are not okay coping mechanisms. And again, I think most counselors would say, you're right, drugs, alcohol, we don't need to continue these patterns. They can be self-destructive for you. They can be destructive toward others. But I think the biggest thing for me too is just the mentality that they're allowing clients to continue in. Like woe is like kind of the woe is me.
So how do you
always someone else's problem, someone else's fault. This happened to me. Of course I'm at a disadvantage,
So how does you saying the opposite of those things help someone get over sexual trauma?
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's the idea of not doing something. I think it's actually dealing with the trauma itself. So in other words, I'm not just going to medicate and hope the medication deals with the anxiety or the depression. I think medication can be very helpful for a season. And sometimes if there's a genuine chemical imbalance, it may be necessary for the rest of an individual's life. But if depression or anxiety is there, not because of just a chemical imbalance or not because of a chemical imbalance, but because of a trauma that's never been dealt with, then let's deal with that trauma. And when I say let's deal with, I don't mean me, to be honest with you. So I don't mean I can help you with that trauma. I mean a licensed professional Christian counselor and often a trauma therapist can help you with that issue.
Okay.
Yeah. And so
what do they do?
So they will actually help that individual walk back through the pain of that trauma. Okay. So it actually can be
that sounds horrible.
Yeah. For the initial moment of it, it actually can cause the client to actually feel and be worse for the initial, as they're walking through the initial trauma therapy. Mm-hmm. They can actually dip because they're having to relive it. Because often it's there. We don't want to relive it. But unfortunately, I've always got this fight or flight thing in me because of what happened here in the past. Mm-hmm. So I'm living on this edge. And so what you're helping someone do is walk back through that, walk through the emotions of it. And what a trauma therapist is going to do is allow you to verbalize what's the feeling of the moment, allowing the feeling to happen, what do you really think about it? And I think some of it is taking ownership of it again. And like, yeah, I felt this way. I was pissed off, or I was devastated, or I was mad because I felt like I wasn't protected by my parents, or someone I trusted abused me. And so that anger can come up all over again, or that sadness, that brokenness. But a lot of times it was just never fully addressed. You were never able to walk through the process of grief and hurt and loss with someone. And so as you're walking through it, yes, you might dip initially, but eventually you start saying, oh, those emotions that I had back then were actually okay, but I don't have to continue on in them today or tomorrow or for the future. I can actually move to a place where I am experiencing healing, that my identity is not a victim. In the Christian world, we would help an individual reclaim an identity as a daughter or a son of God, and all that entails, that they're loved, that they're cherished, that that God delights in them, desires them, rejoices over them, and that God loves them so, God's love and all that stuff that's there, that they would discover that's their identity because of who God says they are and who they are made in the image of God, not simply their identity, or is not simply just what happened to them X amount of years ago.
A lot of people have just never talked about it or allowed themselves to feel all the feelings of it, and a counselor helps them do that.
And have someone help them process all of that in a healthy manner. I think that's the biggest part of it.
Right.
You can have people that experience all those feelings and emotions and may still be experiencing those same feelings, those same emotions 10 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later, and they never had someone to help them process that.
Mm-hmm.
Because it really is, it's not just the emotional part, it's the mental disconnect we can almost create with it, and so to help them mentally, to help them emotionally, to help them form healthy coping mechanisms. And again, my heart for people would be that, that they would actually experience healing in that.
Mm-hmm.
And again, medicine is probably going to be needed initially to help them, because they're going to need the medicine to help them actually go through the difficult parts of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then over time, you wean off that medicine and not become so dependent upon it.
Okay, well, that stuff doesn't sound like BS.
Okay.
But all the rest of it does.
Well, then I've made progress today if I've moved you from it's all BS to, okay, well, maybe there's some that's
okay,
not.
well, there's going to be 4 weeks of this, and there's a lot more BS to get through.
Well, I'm glad we've gone somewhere.
Fine.
So, yes, there we go. You're moving forward, Nate. I'm proud of you.
Whatever.
You're opening your mind, and I like it.